Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The cost of everything under this NDP Liberal government is getting too damn high. Today we are debating Bill C-8, the government's fiscal update from this past December. Now, it feels like a lifetime ago December for me, and I know it feels like a lifetime ago for millions of Canadians. And a lot has changed since then, and the tack taken by this government in this legislation shows just how poorly prepared they are for the new reality that we live in that has changed from just a few months ago. The reality that inflation is at record highs not seen in over 30 years, not in my lifetime. The reality that commodity prices such as oil, natural gas, copper, steel, just to name a few, are hitting record new highs when adjusted for inflation. Highs that, in many ways, are somewhat beneficial for parts of our economy, but also threaten other parts of our economy and threaten the world economy. The reality that Canada's real estate sector is probably the most overvalued asset class anywhere in the world, and that Canadians, especially members of my millennial generation, are either priced out of the housing market altogether or have become so over-leveraged in the effort to get that first home that they are putting themselves in serious financial danger, particularly with rising interest rates. And if we see a correction in our real estate sector, it's going to be tremendously bad for members of my generation who are just getting into the housing market for the first time. Now, given the challenges that I've outlined, I would like to think that the government would want to make an approach in an effort to help Canadian families through this difficult time. But the fact is that as of April 1st, only a few days away, the NDP Liberal government is pledging a further increase to their carbon tax from $40 a tonne to $50 a tonne. Now, that is a whopping 25% increase. And this price increase will result in more taxes on Canadian families and small businesses at a time when they simply can't afford it. Now, the government has said many times, well, wait a minute, the carbon tax is revenue neutral. All funds that have been collected are returned to the provinces and the people that they're collected from. But we've seen testimony recently from the Parliamentary Budget Office that has indicated that the carbon tax's effect on the total economy means that 6 out of 10, about 60% of Canadian families, are worse off because of this carbon tax. We're seeing that out of the funds that are collected, only about 90% are actually being returned directly to families, and that over the past number of years, several provinces have been significantly shortchanged in what they were supposed to get. And now recently, the government's been lauding and bragging about their new plan for the climate action incentive rebates, saying that we're moving it from a one-time annual payment into a quarterly payment. I'm going to list out just why that's not something that you'd really want to be bragging about, because folks in Alberta and other provinces who used to get their full climate action rebate after they filed their taxes are now having to wait for several more months just to get that one quarterly payment. So I understand that there might be a benefit in stretching the payments out in 4 quarterly payments throughout the course of the year, but what we know in this highly inflationary environment that we're in is that the value of a dollar today is very rapidly diminishing. And so the government, by spreading these payments out in a quarterly payment fashion, is actually nickel and diming Canadians. It's actually helping the government's bottom line, because they're able to print those dollars at full value, and then over the course of the year with these quarterly payments, they're actually paying out Canadians less money in real value than if they had just issued them the one-time payment. So with this inflation roiling, this whole shell game about moving it from the single climate action incentive payment to the quarterly payment is really diminishing the value for Canadian families. And it's time for this NDP Liberal government to stop shortchanging these families and to show us the money. Now, moving on to what's happening across the world and how this government is not preparing Canada and has not prepared Canada for the past 6 years. Our European allies and our allies across the world are struggling with their dependence on Russian oil and gas. Now, the Minister of Energy has said we can only offer a measly 300,000 barrels a day of additional production. That's to offset nearly 10 million barrels of lost Russian production. Now, we need to revise the meaning of a drop in the bucket and put Canada's name right in there, because it's simply not enough. Meanwhile, for the past 6 years under this Liberal government, Canada has failed to complete a major pipeline. We have failed to construct a single liquefied natural gas export facility on our coast, and permits for new oil and gas projects have been stalled indefinitely. I think of the Tech Frontier mine, for example. Another example that's more current is the critical Bay du Nord project, which is absolutely vital for the economic health of Newfoundland and Labrador. This is oil that, in the words of the previous Minister of Natural Resources, who's from Newfoundland and Labrador, has said is the cleanest in the world. And it's also oil that won't require the construction of new pipelines because it's literally on the water. It is a no-brainer, and yet this government continues to dither on approving this critical project. We have inflation. We have more taxes. We have projects that aren't being approved, or they're not even moving forward, or they're not being approved at all. And now we have this unscientific Liberal NDP vaccine mandate that are really starting to bite our economy. Now, farmers across Canada, including in my riding, are starting to enter the very busy shipping season, with a lot of our exports heading south to the United States. Now, the rate to move these goods by truck from before the pandemic to now has nearly doubled. And those farm families that can actually get people to move their products are lucky, because it's very difficult to even find a trucker. There was a shortage of about 18,000 truckers before the pandemic, and that has been exploded by a further 16,000 additional truckers that we've lost because of these vaccine mandates. A lot of these unvaccinated truckers are solo truckers from the United States that Canadian farmers have come to depend upon because of our integrated supply chains to move our goods during this busy time of year. But instead, because of our border mandates, these truckers are choosing to stay home. And it's costing our economy hundreds of millions of dollars. And I come from a farm family, and this is a very real reality that these families are facing, is that these truckers aren't coming up from the United States. We're not getting our products moved south of the border. It's a real fact on the ground. The food security of our North American supply chain has been put at serious risk. The cost to produce fertilizer is skyrocketing. The government has even announced plans, as I said earlier, to make it more expensive to produce fertilizer. With nearly a quarter of the world's wheat and other cereal crop production at risk due to the ongoing war in Ukraine, what the Government of Canada is doing is simply reckless and irresponsible. The world not only needs Canada's energy, it also needs Canada's food. We have the ability to be an agricultural superpower, but instead this NDP Liberal government wants to manage the decline of some of our most important traditional industries. Now, I understand that the government says they don't want to take lessons from Conservatives, but they don't need to take lessons from Conservatives to look at what people are doing in provinces and countries around the world. Countries that are even more left-wing than this government. Look, we have a country like Spain, for example, that just announced today that they're cutting the fuel tax on gasoline by 20 cents, or the 20 cents to the euro. We have the NDP provincial government in British Columbia that has announced that they're giving a rebate for families to help them out at the pump. They're cutting these temporary fuel taxes because they recognize that during this inflationary period that these families are hurting. And they're offering families further rebates on home heating. We're seeing that in Alberta. And they're especially suspending further tax increases like we're seeing on April 1st with the Liberal carbon tax. Families can't afford these tax increases on food, home heating, and transportation fuels. And that's why Conservatives are calling on the government to use the windfall that they're receiving from these high commodity prices and from their inflationary spending to lower taxes on families. Because we know that the cost to service this increasing debt and to pay down this debt in the future is only going to be a further burden on Canadian families. It's time to use whatever resources we can to help Canadian families, not with broad-based tax relief, not boutique tax credits like we're seeing in this bill, but broad-based relief that we know will disproportionately help low and middle income earners. We know that cuts to fuel taxes and cuts to consumption taxes have a bigger impact on family budgets for those who make under $50,000 or $100,000. Conservatives are focused on delivering tangible benefits for these working class Canadians who are increasingly struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. Madam Speaker, in closing, Bill C-8 has failed to provide the targeted tax relief that families are needing at this time. It's failed to speed up these resource projects. It's failed to deal with high inflation, and that's why Conservatives can't support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for